It starts with a mark. A scratch, a blot of ink, the click of a typewriter. A dot. Then, sending, receiving, keeping, throwing, organising, storing, reorganising, indexing, opening, excluding. Historians fetishise them, romanticise them, become seduced by them. Each of these marks, these acts, presumes a choice that assumes a type of authority. I authorise this message to you. I stand by this remark, this schedule, this dot. It marks a beginning or an ending. In choosing what gets stored, how, where, and who gets access, the archive becomes a source of power. Political power, social power, cultural power. In it, historians hope to find beginnings, explanations, sources, like the source of a river. Archive fever takes over. In his text Archive Fever, the French philosopher Jacques Derrida sees similarities between psychoanalysis and the archive, between the human mind and the archive. What is the difference between the physical archive, the bricks and mortar, the collective memory that's stored in it, and the archive that's the human mind? It starts with a mark. A neuron firing, a photon hitting a retina, a wave being absorbed by an eardrum. Then, sending, receiving, keeping, throwing, organising, storing, reorganising, indexing. Some memories are forgotten, lost, organised poorly. Some get repressed. Some thoughts are allowed, others are not. Which thoughts? Psychoanalysis, like history, aims to retrieve lost memories, important memories, memories with a story that can help us today. The history of the archive is the history of recording, but for every recording there is also a loss, something not included, an absence. The word archive has its roots in the Greek ark, to govern, to control, to authorize. But anyone familiar with him will know that for Derrida, there is no beginning. The mark is not just a mark. It starts with a mark, but it doesn't start with a mark. It starts before the mark. There's always before, the preceding thought, the thought of the other, the thought that must be understood to understand this thought. And what does the mark mean? The mark contains a trace of other marks. To understand this, you must understand that, and to understand that, you have to understand this. The parallels between the archive and psychoanalysis are in the desire to recover moments of inception, beginnings and origins which, in a deluded way, we think might be some kind of truth. These governed marks are visible in each drawer, but leave spaces through which the historian makes their own mark. Psychoanalysis, for Derrida, should revolutionise the reading of archives through an inquiry of what hides, what's been hidden, what's been chosen, what's not been authorised. The historian Carole Steedman, in her book on the archive, Dust, remarks that nothing starts in the archive, nothing ever at all, though things certainly end up there. You find nothing in the archive but stories caught halfway through, the middle of things, discontinuities. Derrida tells us that Arkhe has its meaning in both commencement and commandment, both a place, an original position, a beginning, a source, and a command, an authority, an order, whether that's an order of the human mind or an order of a superior. Archives are the sites of the great chain, the contract between the living and the dead, the locus of power and authority. Arkhe also comes from arkheion, a house, a dwelling, a residence. A house presumes inclusion and exclusion too. Who has the right to enter, to make the law here, to interpret what goes on? Who has the last word? What, Derrida asks, are the relations between the secret and the non-secret, or, and this is not the same thing, between the private and the public, whether they involve property or access rights, publication or reproduction rights, whether they involve classification and putting into order what comes under theory or under private correspondence, for example, what comes under system, under biography or autobiography, under personal or intellectual animus. Freud asks us this: why do we remember? We remember what's useful, what's a warning, what drives us towards death as well as towards pleasure. The mind, like the archive, isn't just the expression of truth, but is a dangerous place. Derrida imagines a Freudian archive, an archive based on Freud's principles, or an archive of Freud, a Freud museum, a Freud library. What's included under the category of Freud, and who says? What belongs in a history of psychoanalysis? The theory? Should we apply psychoanalysis to Freud himself, to what he's left behind, to the choices of his biographers, to the records and their orders? Which private inscriptions belong, and in which archive? In Freud's? In the institution of psychoanalysis? In the institution of psychology? Where's the limit? What's private and public? What of the father? What of what the father taught Freud? And the grandfather? Did they motivate Freud? Does exploring their marks illuminate Freud in new and insightful ways? Help us to understand him? Where is the beginning? Where is the first mark? Steedman writes that actually, quite apart from anything written by Derrida, or anything reflected on by his critics, archive fever comes on at night, long after the archive has shut for the day. Typically the fever, more accurately the precursor fever, starts in the early hours of the morning, in the bed of a cheap hotel where the historian cannot get to sleep. You cannot get to sleep because you lie so narrowly in an attempt to avoid contact with anything that isn't shielded by sheets and pillowcase. But this, she argues, hides the real anxiety, that you won't do the dead justice. What keeps the historian awake, what brings the fever on, is the myriads of the dead who all day long have pressed their concerns upon you. You think, these people have left me the lot. There's never enough time, you'll never find the first marks, the beginnings. She writes, you know perfectly well that the infinite heaps of things they recorded, the notes and traces that these people left behind, constitute practically nothing at all. There is the great brown, slow-moving, strandless river of everything, and then there's its tiny flotsam that's ended up in the record office you are at work in. And Steedman has learned from Derrida that texts contain what apparently isn't there at all, that they pull against their overt meaning in their unregarded details, in chains of metaphors, in the footnotes, on all the wider shores of signification that are signalled by punctuation marks, by absences, spaces, lacunae, all working against their overt propositions. And what does an absence mark? An absence can feel physical. A loss, a space between folders, or mental, a space between folders in your mind. In other words, in the archival space we physically and mentally navigate around marks, both left in the room, on paper, in diaries, in journals, and in our mind, and we navigate the space between. working out where our own marks go? And what of the hand that knows its mark will be marked, that knows its mark will be archived? Does it censor itself? Of course, we all censor. Does it only mark that which it thinks is worth marking? No, we mark things we wish could be forgotten too. We remember trauma, those past. We remember pain. The archive then is a negotiation between our own marks, what we wish to mark, to record, to reorganise, and the marks and absences of the marks of those long gone, those that we'll never be able to do justice. Historian Arlette Farge has written that archives are never faithful to reality, nor totally representative of it, but they play their part in this reality, offering differences and alternatives to other possible statements. The perception of the organisation of the archive is neither objective nor subjective, but a synthesis between the receiver and the received that's always unstable, always in play, always moving, always creating a future. Maria Tambuco describes it as a folding and unfolding and refolding, rhythms, themes, peripheries, repressions, emergences. Farge continues, I also like to think of the archives as an eruption, because eruption suggests an attack, an incursion, or a sudden and unexpected entry or invasion, for it is in this way that the archives come into their own. Why do we hunt through archives? Why do we psychoanalyze? To spark repressed or forgotten thoughts that hinder us, that hold us back, that hurt us. The psychology of the human mind is the politics, psychology and sociology of the archive, transformed into collective memory that guides our future. To psychoanalyze the archive is to engage in this process, to explore through old thoughts, long forgotten, to bring them to the surface, to organize them into something useful, and do the dead justice, to find the return of the repressed. If you like these videos, I need your help, and here's my request. If you think you get the same value from 4 of these videos as you do from just 1 cup of coffee, then please consider pledging just $1 per video. That's $3 to $4 per month to keep this channel going. You can even limit your pledge to $1 a month, and if you pledge $5, I'll add your name to the credits. To those that already support then and now, thank you so much. This channel just wouldn't exist without you. You can also hit like, share, follow me on Twitter and Facebook, etc. All of these things really contribute to helping then and now grow. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.